Oh, I've got your summer reading for you. I got your reading list. You better make sure Jonah Bromwich's new book, The Definitive Guide to What Happened During the Trump Conviction, Trial, Sentencing in New York. You better have Dragon on Center Street on your bookshelf, on your nightstand, in your summer beach bag. And I did an interview with Jonah. Fascinating. He's not doing this as an outsider. He was an insider. Yes, a New York Times reporter, but he and his team were inside the courtroom, outside the courtroom every day. You might have heard some spot reporting from people doing social media posts, but you're not going to know what really happened unless you hear it through the eyes of Jonah Bromwich. And in my interview with him, we talk about the arraignment process, how they scooped other media because they had a secret weapon on their reporting team, a former prosecutor, now a reporter for them, all the way through Michael Cohen's testimony and the momentum swings throughout the case. And Jonah and I sort of debate, me from a trial lawyer experience and perspective, he from a reporter perspective, sort of the internal momentum of a trial and how it went for the prosecution and the defense. So we do it right here. Here's a clip from my interview with Jonah Bromwich. Why a book pulling it all together through your lens? Why did you think that's important this time?
Yeah. Well, to your point, Michael, when I was in the courtroom during this trial, I found it absolutely spellbinding, just like one of the most fascinating trials I've ever seen. And because I'm a courts reporter, I see trials all the time. And I've even seen trials involving President Trump before. So it was not as if that was the thing that made it so original, so captivating to me. And so I watched this trial day after day. I watched Donald Trump go into a courtroom and sit silently as his allies, as his adversaries testified about him in this incredibly personal way, telling the story of the 2015-2016 presidential campaign. And I found it remarkable. And I think the other people in the courtroom found it remarkable. And then I got out of the courtroom. And people were still, I think critics of Trump in particular, were still very excited about the fact that he had been convicted. But after a week went by and then another week went by, you could just see, A, that people had ceased caring, like it had so quickly moved on. And B, that they really still didn't understand what this trial had been about, that it wasn't just a hush money payment to Stormy Daniels, as it was so often abbreviated, but it was about, the prosecutor said, the corruption of the 2016 election. And so what Trump was found guilty of was corrupting the only election that at that point he had ever won. I thought that was amazing. I thought it was an amazing story. And I thought there was a story to tell, not just about the trial, but about why people didn't seem to understand it. What about the rule of law? What about the justice process at this point in the 21st century is escaping people? And so that's what the book is about. The book is about not just the trial of Donald Trump, but what he's so good at in our current media environment and what institutions, prosecutors, judges fail to do in our current media environment.
Yeah, you certainly accomplished that. Tell the audience about the title, if you want to do a little bit of a spoiler there.
Sure.
And we're going to talk about where to get the book as we continue during this interview. Yeah. But I was struck by the title. I have a connection to the person that you got the word from, which I'll talk about in a second. But tell the audience why Dragon on Center Street.
So what I conceived of this book as really a contest between Donald Trump and the rule of law, those institutions that I was just talking about that carry out the operations of the rule of law. And I was trying to think of, okay, well, how could I put those two things kind of correspondingly? How could I show them to be opposites in some way, polar opposites? And the quote that came to me, like slightly cringily, but I couldn't get it out of my mind, was Kanye West's old quote about Donald Trump having dragon energy, which I've thought about for a long time, ever since he said it in 2018, because I've noticed that so many people have qualities that Trump has: the shamelessness, the self-promotion, the combativeness, and those people tend to kind of excel in our era. If you do those things, the social internet in particular, cable television, they will reward you and your profile will expand. So when I thought about what is the opposite of rule of law, I thought, oh, it's dragon energy. And so Dragon on Center Street refers to this kind of combat between these two polar opposite forces.
Yeah, I'm very Game of Thrones. I like that kind. We know how that House of Dragons ended, or we think we did. I have my own link to Kanye West. You might know of. I have a very now famous, went viral cross-examination in a deposition of Kanye West in a case, which he called me boy about 50 times.
Oh my God.
And put on a black Jesus mask during the deposition. So when I saw the Kanye West connection, but we had another sort of connection, one that I mentioned to you that I picked up on early on in the book, because I'm a voracious reader in this area, and then something that I had forgotten until I read a portion of your book. So when I read it, I was like, this is right up there with what I consider to be one of the best books ever written about a famous trial, which is the run of his life, People versus O.J. Simpson by Jeffrey Toobin. And when I mentioned that to you, you had an interesting comment back.
Yeah, well, I mean, that book and Jeff's work generally is a real touchstone for me. I mean, he is the not just legal reporter par excellence, but the one who can make these trials and these complex legal matters into stories. And so I had read the OJ book shortly before I started working my own. It was absolutely an influence on me. And Jeff, he knows my father. He and I are acquainted. We actually saw each other during the trial. He was there occasionally. One of his comments makes it into the book. He was very prescient, I think, about the lack of cameras in the courtroom. And so one of the things that I think is so great about his OJ book, and something I tried to echo in this book, partly just because it's in all our interest to do so, I think, is legal institutions seem so oblique and difficult to understand from outside. But at the end of the day, these institutions, like all institutions, are made up of individuals. The prosecutors, the judges, these are real people. They have psychologies, they have personal histories. And what I try and do in this book is really explain that this case is not just something that was ginned up against Donald Trump by anonymous kind of bureaucrats, but by a very specific prosecutor, Alvin Bragg, with a specific history, by an office with its own history. And I really tried to fit this case with its kind of unusual legal theory, but its very compelling jury aspect into the world of Alvin Bragg and where he's from and why he might be the person who would bring this case.
Yeah, that's a great thing. When I'm going to try to not do this as disjointed as I may like to. I'll try to do it a little bit in order. But when we get back to the moment when in the book, when you talk about Susan Necklace digging in on whether a dinner was a dinner with Stormy Daniels, it did remind, and we'll get to that in a moment, it reminded me almost exactly about how Marcia Clark went after a friend of mine from NYU, who unfortunately, Ellen Aronson, who was on a blind date when she was leaving Mezzaluna or whatever the restaurant was, and walked by Rockingham and heard or didn't hear the dog bark. And that screwed up Marcia Clark's timeline. And she decided to attack Ellen Aronson about whether she had drinks or didn't have drinks and why her tab was $25 in LA in the 90s without dinner. And it was, right? They get so myopic in the moment. You know
this better than I do, Michael, but lawyers' command of these cases, the amount of details they know, you need it, right? You need it to be a good trial lawyer. You need to have complete command of what happened. At the same time, though, and this is a problem for those of us who tell stories about these trials, you can get trapped there like sludge, and you can start to obsess over details that people don't think matter or that just seem boring, and you lose the attention of the jury. So storytelling in the courtroom, I think it's really important to remember kind of which details matter and which details are extraneous. And that came up again a lot in this trial.
One of the things that I learned early on in your book was about the role that one of your colleagues, Kate Christebeck, played. I did not know that you had a former prosecutor on your team and was giving you some insider knowledge about what to look for, especially with target bag guy.
That's
and whether he was carrying the blue indictment manual or wasn't. Why don't you talk to the audience about who was on your team? You know, what was the role that Kate played in helping you with information and getting some scoops that other news organizations didn't seem to be focused on?
So the first chapter of the book tells the story about how we broke the news of the Trump indictment in Manhattan, the first indictment of an American president ever. And I worked with a New York Times team of 5 other reporters and me. So there were a lot of us kind of planning and working on this. And one of them was Kate Christebeck. Kate Christebeck used to be a Manhattan prosecutor, and she really knew the courthouse personnel, not just other prosecutors who would never have talked to her about this kind of thing, but also court officers and grand jury wardens and judges and senior judges. And so in this particular case, one of the things we were looking to do was understand what it would look like when Trump was indicted. We knew that a grand jury was hearing evidence about him, but we didn't know exactly what it would look like. And Kate, through her sourcing, learned who the grand jury warden was who was overseeing that case. And we had pictures of him. And so what we started doing was tracking his comings and goings along with the three prosecutors who were leading this case. And as we started to see them go to and from the grand jury building, we started to build a picture in our heads of what the indictment would look like. And so when the time came and Trump was in fact indicted, we really felt that we were the only ones on the ground who were able to recognize this pattern that stood out amongst the mundanity of these random courtroom operations. And we were able to break that story. And so one of the reasons I wanted to tell that story too is, as I'm saying, I think institutions are so private, so secretive about this type of thing. And I think when you can lift the curtain and demystify how we work as reporters, it's not that we're just being handed something from one or the other side. It's often really hard, kind of laborious work over a matter of weeks to find this information and to put together all these little crumbs to form a cookie, as my colleague Willie Rashbaum says, and I think says in the book.
It says it's Alvin Bragg, but Alvin Bragg misses the cookie. He doesn't want to receive the cookie metaphor.
That's right. Exactly.
I guess that's the right way to put it. Karen Friedman Ignifilo works with me on the podcast here. She was in that office for 30 years. She overlapped between as you and I talked about it, she was the buckle between Cy Vance and an Alvin. Of course, she left, or Morgenthau and Cy Vance, sorry. And then she left before the election. So I don't have any insider knowledge, but she knows a lot of the players. I knew a lot of the names from her, when it was like, oh, Susan Hoffinger, and then Karen would tell us on Legal AF how astute of a prosecutor was, or Joshua Steinglass is an amazing trial lawyer. Like we heard that on Legal AF before, but to see you really, like I had never known that in his closing argument, Josh Steinglass did a 3-minute version imitation of Michael Cohen making a phone call. That was very like that got missed in the reporting.
Totally. And that was one of the most extraordinary moments in the courtroom the whole time. And I'll say a little more about it.
Yeah, please.
One of the things that happened during the trial is there was this moment of a momentum swing. I think the prosecutors really had a lot of momentum for a lot of the time. And then Todd Blanche had this one very successful, seeming at the time, cross-examination of Michael Cohen, in which he seemed to show that Michael Cohen had lied about a phone call, and said that on a phone call he talked to Trump, but it didn't necessarily seem as if he talked to Trump. It seemed as if he was complaining about being bullied by a 14-year-old, and all these details are in the book. And so this was something that the prosecutors needed to handle. And so Josh Steinglass, the idea he wanted to illustrate was simply a 90-second phone call may seem short, but it's actually much longer than you think.
Right.
But rather than simply telling the jury that, which would have which they could have dismissed in a heartbeat, he actually performed a 45-second imitation of what the phone call Michael Cohen had placed might have looked like, in which he both complained about being bullied by a 14-year-old, but then asked to be put on the line with Trump and told him about this important feat of the Hushman case.
Because as you said in your writing, they talk in shorthand and they don't have to have law. They talk in, got it, boss, got it. Is that thing taken care of? The thing's taken care of. I mean, they talk like mobsters, especially people that, where Michael's like the consigliere fixer for all that time. And you're right. I mean, those 40, and we said it on Legal AF, we said it was both. It was a phone call about a 14-year-old prankster, and it was a phone call about put the boss on. And
totally.
But you're right. The jury presentation, and I'm sure they worked on that before. I don't think it was like, let's try the glove on an OJ last minute, right? So he thought about it, but we missed that. That's what I love about books like yours, and yours in particular, is that that I couldn't pick up from the social media posts that were being done hourly or minute by minute about how effective that closing argument was. Welcome back, Jonah Bromwich. We're going to see more of him and see more of him here on Legal AF. New York Times reporter. Get his book anywhere you can. It's called Dragon on Center Street. You'll find out why. I'll give you a clue. One of my good friends, Kanye West, that's being sarcastic, called Donald Trump Dragon Energy. At Dragon Energy. I love it. It's perfect. And we talk more to people like Jonah here on Legal AF. Great interviews, great content, all because you're here with us. So take a moment, hit the free subscribe button, help us continue to grow our pro-democracy channel in collaboration with the Midas Touch Network. So until my next interview, my next report, I'm Michael Popok. I'm Michael Popok, and I got some big news for our audience. Most of you know me as the co-founder of Midas Touch's Legal AF and the Legal AF YouTube channel, or as a 35-year national trial lawyer. Now, building on what we started together on Legal AF, I've launched a new law firm, the Popok Firm, dedicated to obtaining justice through compassionate and zealous legal representation. At the Popok Firm, we are focused on obtaining justice for those who have been injured or damaged by a life-altering event by securing the highest dollar recoveries. I've been tirelessly fighting for justice for the last 35 years, so my own law firm organically building on my Legal AF work just feels right. And I've handpicked a team of top-tier trial fighters and settlement experts throughout all 50 states known as big auto injury attorneys who have the know-how to beat heartless insurance companies, corporations, government entities, and their attorneys. Big Auto's attorneys working with my firm are rock stars in their respective states and collectively responsible for billions of dollars in recoveries. So if you or a loved one have been on the wrong side of a catastrophic auto, motor vehicle, rideshare, or truck accident, suffered a personal injury, or been the victim of medical malpractice, employment harassment or discrimination, or suffered a violation of your civil and constitutional rights, then contact the Popok Firm today at 1-877-POPOK-AF or by visiting my website at www.thepopokfirm.com and fill out a free case evaluation form. And if we determine that you have a case and you sign with us, we don't get paid unless you do. The Popok Firm, fighting for your justice every step of the way.